Delighted to say we're joined by Yvo de Boer, former Executive Secretary of the UNFCC. Yvo, you now work for KPMG, and a lot of the talk in the last couple of weeks has been about the interlinking between the public and the private sector and climate change finance. How do you see that playing out, and how crucial do you see the private sector being in coming to an agreement on deals such as the Green Climate Fund?
Well, if I look out there in the real world, about 85% of the investments in the energy sector are private, not public, so why should that be any different under a climate change regime? In other words, the bulk of the investment will be made by the private sector. The same applies in terms of coping with the impacts of climate change. If you look at the recent flooding that happened in Bangkok, it was mainly the private sector that had to pick up the bill as a result of that flooding. So I think that the private sector is heart and center of this, both on mitigation and adaptation. And as a consequence, I think it's really important that national strategies or nationally appropriate mitigation actions, NAMAs as they're called here, are really framed in such a way that they make it possible for the private sector to actually be the main part of the solution in terms of a green growth story. And similarly, that means that if you're going to design international finance vehicles like the Green Climate Fund, you need to ensure that those are open to private sector participation, because that's where the bulk of the money will have to come from.
How do you get over the suspicion that many developing countries feel about private sector finance?
I don't think that developing countries are so much afraid of private sector finance. I think that many developing countries are afraid that rich countries will use the private sector as an excuse not to meet their financial obligations under the convention. So it's actually not fear of the private sector, but rather that the private sector will be used as an excuse not to pick up a bill. And that, to my mind, means that we need much more precision and transparency on the public finance contribution that's going to be coming from industrialized countries. And then I think that fear will go.
KPMG's had a long history in climate finance and climate sort of policy, and this is an area you're spearheading. What role are they playing in terms of these talks and perhaps the Green Climate Fund as well?
Well, in the run-up to this conference, we actually brought out a paper on how we think a NAMA, a National Mitigation Action Plan, can be structured in such a way that it actually becomes a vehicle for private sector investment and private sector action. So that's our contribution to the process in terms of thinking about how can you make action on climate change much more private sector oriented. How can you engage real companies in real mitigation action? How can you mobilize real private finance towards national goals and national strategies? So that's really part of what we're contributing to the process here.
And I know you're a bit further away from the process now, but do you look at what are your thoughts when you look at the negotiations at the moment?
I think there's a huge willingness, a huge desire to come to a result. I think that countries do not want to see a failure in Durban, don't want to see this process collapse in the way that the Doha round was declared dead by the G20 not all that long ago. So people want to come to a result here, but it's not going to be easy.
There's the famous picture of you wiping away tears. I think it was in Bali in the colourful shirt. Do you feel a bit of sympathy sometimes for for Christiana Figueres when you see her on the podium trying to corral all these different parties into shape?
Well, I think she's doing a fantastic job. She manages to keep a smile on her face at moments when I think I would have had difficulty doing that. So I think she's doing a great job.
And in terms of what we might expect at the end of this week, you know, you're hugely experienced in these type of negotiations. Are we in the media expecting too much too soon to have concrete proposals on the Wednesday ahead of the final day? Do you think this is going to run right until throughout the night on Friday?
Give a negotiator an hour and he or she will take an hour and 5 minutes. Give a negotiator 7 days and he or she will take 8. Give a negotiator 2 weeks and you go into Saturday morning lunchtime. So I think that's what will happen again.
Thank you very much.
Okay.